Welcome back to the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum. Let me spend today telling you a little bit more about Audie. After he entered the military, we focused on three of the main campaigns that he was in. This one here was in Anzio, Italy, southern Italy. And this was ended up being some of the worst fighting that he saw. What happened here, they thought when they came in off the ocean onto the beach, it got hilly pretty quickly. And you know, the commanding officers, they thought, oh, it'll just take 4 days to get up over into the hills and to overcome the Italians. But it didn't. Unfortunately, they were stuck on that beach for 4 months to the day that they landed. It took that long to make it up into the hills. To protect themselves, they had to dig foxholes to help them out, and they would do a lot of their fighting at night. One of the biggest problems they had, so if you look at this picture here, this was called Anzio Italy, and it was on tracks, and it could actually reach up in the hills, and it could actually reach the beach. And if you look here, this is some of it shelling right next to our hospital that was on the beach. So that gives you kind of an idea just how difficult it was, the fighting in Anzio. And this was also where Audie earned his very first medal as well. Now, another battle that we talk about was when they landed in France. Unfortunately, this was where Audie's best friend was killed. If you've heard the story, they were in the woods fighting, and Audie and his company, they had the disadvantage because they were downhill and the Germans were up above. They were up in the forest, a little bit higher up. And one of the soldiers held up a white flag. Well, that's supposed to mean surrender. Audie didn't believe it, but his friend next to him did, and he stood up and was shot and killed. Well, Audie then, of course, he got extremely angry and somehow survived what he did next. He went charging up the hill and took out the German soldiers. And how he survived that, I still do not know, because they didn't stop shooting while he went running up the hill. And then also in Holsworth, this is where he earned the Medal of Honor. And it was they were trying to fight. They were the only company in this one area, because a couple miles back the bridge had collapsed. So while that was being rebuilt, they were trying to hold off the German advancement in this one particular area in Holsworth. And they were losing. And so Audie told his men to retreat, and to help cover their retreat, if you've ever seen the movie To Hell and Back, it covered that a lot. And he jumped up onto a burning tank and kept firing. Don't know how long he was firing, as well as at the same time he was also calling down for artillery fire at the same time. And like I said, if you watch the movie, you can tell how close the enemy soldiers were, because he's basically telling them to fire basically almost where he was standing. And eventually, don't know how long it actually took, but they're estimating probably around 45 minutes. He managed to get the German soldiers to retreat themselves, and then he called his own men back and they went after him. So because of that, he earned the Medal of Honor. And after that, they went on to Germany, and he did not he wasn't in the field much longer because he had been wounded, and then eventually he was shipped back home. I mean, if you think about it, he was in the Army, only about 3 years, and managed to do a lot of things in just that short amount of time. And also remember, he did all of this before he was ever 21. So you can imagine just how quickly he had to grow up. Now, when he came back from the Army, or from World War II, he ended up he didn't know what he really wanted to do, and so did a lot of press type things for the military to help them out. So he traveled a lot for a while, and then ended up meeting James Cagney. All of you know he was an actor, became friends with him, And he said, why don't you get into the movie business? So he decided to do that. And it was a bit of a rocky start. Took him a little bit of time to get into it. He almost gave up at one point. But then finally got his first bit part. You know, like maybe, I think it lasts about 10 seconds, if that. He didn't even talk. He was just walking across the room. But that went on. He went on to star in over 40 films and became a well-known actor. And the most popular movie he ever did, of course, was To Hell and Back, which is based on his life experiences and the book he wrote about his life and his time during World War II. He ended up getting married twice, had 2 children with his second wife, and unfortunately died very young. In 1973, he was in a plane crash, one of those small 6-7-seater planes in the mountains in Virginia, in Roanoke, Virginia. We have the actual control panel that was in that plane, and you know, to me, the fact that he survived all the things that happened to him in the war and then died in a plane crash of all things is just really sad that that happened. It took them about 3 days to find them. There were, if I remember right, there were 7 people on the plane and none survived. But he still has a lasting legacy even today. You know, they did some of the little things they did in his memory and honor. Do any of you remember when if you were younger, they made a G.I. Joe doll out of Audie? They did a lot of tribute type things. There also is, to this day, a Sergeant Audie Murphy Club in the Army. It's extremely difficult to get into, and you cannot nominate yourself. You have to be nominated, and you go through some very rigorous testing and boards. We have a lot of soldiers that are going through that will come and visit the museum quite often. They're doing research and trying to get to know him better. And in fact, the last few years we've had a group over in Dallas bring a whole section of those participants who are trying to, soldiers who are trying to get into the Audie Murphy Club. He will bring them here on their last day. They will tour the museum, and then he tells them which of them made it to the next level. So that's a very neat experience, especially being able to talk to these amazing soldiers today, and the fact that they also remember and respect the soldiers from before is a wonderful thing. And well, like I said, he had a very an excellent life. He had his troubles as well, but you know, everybody does, especially when you're having to fight during a war. It's definitely not easy. And he was the first to admit that he did have problems. He was one of the early ones to admit that he had what we now call PTSD. Back then they called it combat fatigue. So he often went around to the veterans hospitals and would talk to soldiers and veterans about their experiences. So that was very unusual. It's to have anybody willing to talk about that back then. And he was one of the early ones that did. All right, well, I think that's all I'll tell you about Audie today. This is just a small peek into what we cover in our museum. You could spend a long time here learning a little bit about everything. And we hope you come back and see us, and we look forward to seeing you.